quality of the color pencil is important when you're trying to achieve realism, or is more important to have determination and hard work? My name is Drago Sepina, and in this video I'm going to put head to head two sets of pencils, a cheap one called Crayola and an expensive one called Caran d'Ache.
Let's start with the Crayola pencils. The set has 36 pencils, but I will only use 20 because the more expensive set has as well only 20 pencils. These pencils don't have a covered end, which means the pencil lid is exposed, that fact increasing the risk of breakage. What I like about these pencils is that each of them are marked with the name of the color. Crayolas are wax based, which means they have a soft lid. Another very important fact about this brand is their light fastness, which is non-existent. What does that mean? Light fastness is basically how fast the colors will fade in contact with light. So keep in mind that Crayolas will fade very fast. Out of a 36 pencil set, one costs only 13 cents, which is very affordable. But will this low price be reflected in the quality of the end result? That's what we're about to find out later on. Next in line are these bad boys. This is a set of 20 color pencils called Caran d'Ache Luminance. Unlike the other brand, these pencils are capped, which minimizes the risk of lid breakage a lot. A plus is that the covered end represents the color of the pencil as well, which is very useful when choosing the colors for the new drawing. The name of the color is also available on each pencil. When held in hand, it feels very high quality. Likewise Crayola, Caran d'Ache Luminance are as well wax-based pencils. Unlike Crayolas, Luminance have the highest light fastness in the world, which ensures the colors will stay intact for many years to come. The price of a single pencil in this set is $3.40, which is almost as much as the entire set of Crayola pencils. That's crazy, right? I will now put one color from each set against each other to compare them. The top row will be for Caran d'Ache Luminance pencils and the bottom row will be for the Crayola pencils. I've tried to choose two colors as similar as possible to have a more realistic comparison. What I noticed from the start is that the Crayola pencils need a lot more pressure to fill in as much of the paper stout as possible, while the Luminance applies very easily, having a creamier composition. What you don't see in this video is that the Crayola pencil's lid broke a few times during the creation of the swatches, which is a minus. That negative aside, the cheap pencils performed very well compared to the expensive ones, with some colors turning out to be very vibrant. Crayola color pencils have very simple names, while Caran d'Ache Luminance have some very complicated and hard to read ones. Another plus of Crayolas is that the paper doesn't eat as much pigment, which saves a lot of time from sharpening, whereas Caran d'Ache Luminance tip is wearing off quite fast. To see how good each of the two sets are at shading, I drew a sphere that I will test it on. The first thing I noticed was that it was very difficult to create an even layer. Some strokes left a few marks behind, but towards the end, pressing very carefully, I managed to cover them up and create an acceptable shading. As I mentioned earlier, these pencils have the advantage of the creamy texture, which makes my work much easier, being able to create a mark-free and even layers for the entire sphere. Crayola's layering required a lot of pressure on the pencil, which is not good when you have a project that you have to work on for hours. This will strain your wrist and fingers a lot. That aside, the end result was pleasantly surprising. The colors were very vibrant and the transition between them was very smooth. Creating these layers with Caran d'Ache Luminance was very quick and easy, which is the only positive difference between those two brands, along with the fact that the colors also appear a bit more vibrant, as the end result is strikingly similar. Creating a gradient with the cheaper pencils was very difficult and frustrating. Besides being very hard to blend, they also created some wax bloom between the blue and red color transitions. The oxidation of the wax binder in the pigment is commonly referred to as wax bloom. It can leave a muddy color over a dark pigmented area of your drawing. Unlike the previous brand, Caran d'Ache Luminance have done a wonderful job. Everything went on smoothly. I was able to blend the colors very quickly and easily. Their creamy texture made it possible to have a smooth transition between the colors. What jumps at me now is that I should have insisted a bit more in some places to create an even smoother blending. Here I'm going to be very brief and to the point. The white pencil in the Crayola set is not good at all. When trying to burnish the purple color, I noticed that the white pencil doesn't make a difference at all, and after a few applications, I can go over it again. This is definitely one of the white pencils that deserves to be in every pencil artist set. Burnishing was an instant success, it didn't require a lot of pressure on the pencil, and it didn't took long either. But what is this thing called burnishing? Burnishing is basically layering until no paper tooth is showing through the layers. This technique works best with wax-based pencils such as this brand. The only minus point of using a white pencil for burnishing is that it brightens up all the colors, which for many artists can be a problem. Creating details with Crayolas was surprisingly fun and easy. When it comes to fine detailing, this brand took me back to another favorite brand of mine called Faber-Castell Polychromos. The tip stayed sharp most of the time, which is most important in creating fine details, plus the paper hardly ate any pigment at all. When I refer to the paper eating the pencil's pigment, I mean how quickly the pencil's lid wears off. As a big advantage it is that these pencils have a creamy texture, is disappointing when it comes to creating details. Since they wear off pretty fast, the details won't be as fine and precise, which makes me recommend these pencils more for creating smoother textures like skin, eyes or lips. Now let's move on to the big test of these two brands, which is creating a whole drawing. I will start out with the cheap ones. I honestly didn't know what to expect before starting this drawing, but I was very excited about the end result. Having a hard lid, these pencils were ideal for drawing fine details like the ones in the black areas. The peachy color was very easy to apply to the paper. I tried not to press very hard from the start because I knew more layering would follow, but I was sure it would work from my experience with trying this method at the beginning of this video. One minus point of using the black pencil in this set is that it's not very pigmented, which required a lot more pressure to get the black to be as intense as possible, especially since in some places I had to use it for some finer details. What must be taken into account is that the quality of the paper also matters a lot when using cheaper materials. I, for example, now use Fabriano Artistic watercolor paper, which is very good quality, making the job much easier. In no way will this set perform the same on plain printing paper. What was pleasing to the eye is the high vibrancy of the darker colors, like orange or blue. I was also able to easily layer the orange color over the peachy one, and after a lot of force applied on the black pencil, create a powdery effect on the butterfly wing in the blue areas. What brings this drawing to life, along with the other things, is the use of black to create a strong contrast. This is another thing that is not about the quality of the materials, but rather how they are used. Mentioning once again the advantage of the hard tip, I was also successful in creating a furry effect in the butterfly body area, this definitely requiring a sharp and strong lid. What I want to say towards the end of this half of the butterfly is that in order to have a realistic outcome, we need to know how to create contrast by placing highlights and shadows in the right areas without being afraid of using these two shades and utilizing a quality paper that we are familiar with. I want to start this half of the drawing by saying that this area took me half as long as using the cheaper pencils, which is a big plus. One disappointing thing is when I tried to create a furry and powdery effect with the black pencil. As we know from the previous section on creating details, the very soft lid prevents this, making these pencils not ideal for this purpose. Sticking to details, another disadvantage of this brand is the fact they are wearing off so fast, leaving you with a dull pencil most of the time, which requires constant sharpening, losing a lot of time in the end. The colors are almost as vibrant as the cheaper ones, which is a great plus. What you pay the high amount of almost $4 on a pencil for is the 100% light fastness, which is the most important detail to keep in mind when you are working with clients and want to make sure you use the best quality materials. Of course, the other aspects like the quality of the outer part of the pencil and the way they are designed overall shouldn't be ignored at all, as these are some important features themselves. The black pencil is very pigmented and the white one is very good for burnishing or adding highlights, making them a strong duo to add lots of contrast. I would totally recommend these pencils, but because the price is so high, not everyone can afford them. It took me a few months of questioning and saving to purchase a set of 20 pencils, which when you think about it, sounds like an insane amount of money for only this small number of pencils, and trust me, that thought came through my mind as well, but they are totally worth it. You work faster, easier, you are sure as well that you use the best quality pencils, and overall the whole process of creating gets more pleasant, unlikely using bad materials, which creates a lot of frustrations, which can take the fun out of drawing. These are all my thoughts about these two brands. I know I could have talked much more about them, but I wanted to keep this video as short and to the point as possible. I'm really pleased with how both of the sets performed. There is almost no difference between the two sides, which takes me back to the beginning of this video. Is the quality of the pencils important when you are trying to achieve realism, or is more important to have determination and work hard? Well, I think a bit of both is essential, since one without another doesn't work.
Now we came to an end of the video. I really hope you enjoyed it and you've learned a lot from it. I am posting one time a week and normally graphite, color pencil or pastel related videos. So if you don't want to miss any of those, please hit that subscribe button and the bell button as well to be notified every time a video goes live. And I really hope I'm going to see you in the next one as well. Have a nice day. Bye guys!